Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with Emily. Emily, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Emily Fries, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I specialize in working with couples who are struggling in their relationship, as well as specializing in reproductive and maternal mental health. I am the founder and owner of New Beginnings Counseling Group in Utah County. We have 3 locations, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Thank you, Emily. So I know today we're going to be focusing a bit on infidelity. So I wanted to start off with how many cases do you work on that include infidelity? Is this a common issue that you come across within relationships?
Yes, in fact, I think you'd be surprised at just how common it is. As I was kind of preparing for this interview today, I kind of looked through my not only current client load, but also in my past, and was surprised that nearly 50% of the couples that I see have experienced some form of infidelity at one point in their relationship history. And I would say that what's interesting is I actually looked up some statistics on that to see if that was a common thing as well, and found that nearly 46 to 50% from a study that was done back in 2021 had experienced some sort of infidelity in their relationship. So it was very consistent with what I'm seeing in my own practice. So it was really interesting.
Feels like a pretty high number.
Yeah, it
And I feel
definitely
like
is.
a lot of these relationships and probably have children as well, right? And so how does infidelity affect children when they see that going on in their family?
Yeah, this is probably the hardest part is how impactful this is on children. As you can imagine, children are highly intuitive and perceptive, so they can kind of feel what is going on in their home. And even if it's not being done overtly where people can see what's going on, they do sense that something is happening. And so they are impacted, and it can be really harmful, even if the child isn't told what's going on. So, what happens is they start to notice that a parent might be acting differently, a little bit more distant or disconnected from what's going on. Maybe they're noticing an increase in fighting or arguing between the parents. And this can, as you can imagine, can be really unsettling to children because it impacts their sense of stability and safety in their home. And it can really impact the, feeling more anxious or unsettled, not knowing what's going on. So yeah, they definitely can feel what's going on in their parents' relationship. And often the way it shows up is that children begin to act out. So they may start to have more behavioral issues, they may withdraw, or depending on the age of the child, they may start to inflict harm to themselves, or there might be some regression. So there's a lot of different outcomes that happen to children when infidelity is an issue in the home.
Is there a way to help children cope from like an outside perspective or like from the parent who wasn't in participating in infidelity? Is there a way like someone else can help the child cope?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is even though parents might be having the affair or the infidelity relationship, it doesn't mean that they don't care less for their children. So, in my experience, I think I've worked with couples who are going through infidelity in their relationship, and they'll often bring up problems that are happening in the home with their children. And they'll talk about how their kids are acting out and they're really either getting on each other or they're fighting a lot. And one of the things I'll usually say to them is, well, this could be a reflection of what they're seeing happening between you and your partner. And so, parents, even though they may be the ones that are kind of causing this behavior change, they are also very concerned with what's going on with their kids. So it's really an interesting dilemma for parents because they certainly don't want their kids to suffer, but they also may not even realize just how extensive their behaviors are influencing their kids to doing these types of behaviors. So in terms of support, I think, parents are really the front line in supporting their kids. And so when I'm working with them, I'll talk a lot about the importance of understanding the influence that their choices are having on their children, and asking them if that's something that they want to change, and then talking about ways in which I could potentially help them by repairing their relationship. There's often a significant decrease in behavioral issues with kids when the parents are working on their relationship.
Have you found in your years of practice that there's any correlation between children who witness infidelity and grow up to practice infidelity? Is there any correlation? Does it really just depend on the person?
Actually, that's an excellent question. And the answer is absolutely. There's been research that's been done that indicates how children can be dramatically impacted by a parent who exposes them to an infidelity, and how that impacts their future relationships with other people, particularly their own relationship. And so one of the things that will often it does is it actually puts a child at greater risk to have infidelity in their future relationships. So children whose parents who have been unfaithful are increasingly prone to or at risk for a lot of emotional and relational issues as they become adults. So you'll see a lot of children who have pent up anger. Maybe it shows up in anxiety or guilt, shame, a lot of sadness and confusion. And so what ends up happening is that when they become older, because of that modeling, and depending on how the parents have been able to resolve or, come to terms with that choice, it still impacts the child, and the child becomes tainted with that affair that their parents had, which may complicate the opportunity that they'll have later on in life to date or even get married. So yes, it definitely has a long-lasting impact.
I went right into my next question. So you answered that right there. What long-lasting impact does it have on children? So what is something people misunderstand about infidelity? Is there something that we don't understand? Because it's hard to understand why people would do it. So like, what is the reason, or how can we understand people who do it better?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of misconceptions about infidelity. So I'll try to hit a lot of them to the best of my ability, but there's not any particular order in which I'm going to answer that question. So I think the first thing is what sets people up for infidelity. And in my experience and in my practice, I think the most important thing that I recognize is unmet needs. So when you are married or you have a committed relationship, your relationship with your partner is based on what I focus on in terms of attachment. So this relationship is an attachment-based relationship where you look to your partner to meet your needs. And that could include physical needs, sexual needs, obviously, and emotional needs. And generally what ends up happening is that over time, what can happen is there could be kind of an, evolution of the loss of connection, which then creates a loss of attunement to whatever the person might need from their partner. There can be a loss of trust with them to feel like they can rely on their partner for different things because they've tried to get the needs met. And if it consistently is unmet, then they start to really kind of become apathetic. So I think it's important to know that unmet needs are really kind of the catalyst that starts a person down that path. However, there's also situations where it's not planned at all. And so I think it's important to know that there are a lot of people that think that individuals go into an affair or a relationship, and that was something they were planning to do. In reality, a lot of it is just kind of happenstance where it just kind of evolves. So if your needs are not being met at home, most affairs actually occur in the workplace. So it's being around people who share similar interests, who share similar stresses, and that you can talk about different things that then lead to friendships, that then lead to starting to share more personal information, and then it becomes something that is created into a more emotional or even physical sexual affair. So I think that's one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have, is that that it's something that people plan to do, but a lot of times is it just kind of happens. I think another thing is that a lot of affairs might occur because they feel unloved, or that they don't feel like their sexual needs are being met. So it becomes more of a sexual outlet for them. And yet there's so many things that are underneath that, kind of like what I was explaining before about unmet emotional needs. I think it's important to also know that affairs don't always just happen in troubled marriages. And I think that that's something that a lot of people actually don't or can't even comprehend, that infidelity can actually happen in good marriages. And so there really isn't one reason why somebody has an affair. It just depends on the circumstances. I think another myth, and this is a really interesting actually statistic, is that men are the primary individuals who have affairs or engage in infidelity. It is really changing, where I'm actually seeing more women who are engaging in infidelity and in different relationships that are outside of their commitment in their relationship that they're currently in. In fact, statistically, women represent about 40% of infidelity, which is a really interesting fact, because most men are the ones that are kind of accused of that. So that's an interesting thing that's starting to change, and probably is related to the fact that there's a lot more women in the workforce. So they are surrounding themselves with individuals that have a lot of the same interests and the same responsibilities. And so they might travel a lot together. And so they develop connection with individuals, and that can often put them at great risk for that. So those are just a few things that I could say about some of the misunderstandings about infidelity. There's a lot more, but I think we'll be covering those other items here soon.
Another question made me think of, I know like in a lot of circumstances of infidelity, there's always the blame game of who to blame. Well, you weren't meeting my needs, so I had to go elsewhere, or, and then on the other side, they're like, well, you just left, you weren't communicating with me. How do you help people with the blame game within counseling?
Well, I think the first thing is to call it out as blaming. I think one of the things that they often do is they make the other person the bad guy. But by doing that, by blaming somebody else, you're really just underhandedly ignoring your accountability in the problem. And, a relationship is just that. It's a relationship with another person. So if one person is making a choice to get involved with another person, there's got to be a reason that is motivating that behavior. And again, it could come from their past as well. So, if you end up having a greater risk for having infidelity, it may be that you saw your parents not really be committed to each other. And so the minute you have some issues or it becomes really stressful in your relationship, that's what you've been modeled. So a lot of times that might put you at greater risk to going out and doing that. So blaming each other isn't necessarily going to really matter when it comes down to the fact is that their relationship is in peril and in crisis, and they both need to choose whether or not they're going to work on it. So no matter where the problem started, both of them are accountable to make it work. And that's really an important key principle there.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but how does a child cope with trying to keep a parent's infidelity issues in secret? We talked about how when children are they have issues at home, right? When they see things going on. Was there anything else you've noticed with children trying to cope with keeping a secret from their parents?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing to say is that the worst thing that could happen is a parent asking a child to keep an affair a secret, but it does happen, because what ends up happening is that it places this child in a very burdensome situation where it can literally alienate them from the other parent. And if you know children, they're loyal to both. They love their parents both equally. And if they're keeping a secret, and again, it depends on their cognitive abilities, their age, and how they may perceive what's going on in the relationship. But what it ends up doing is it ends up breeding a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of emotional stress. It can drum up a lot of shame and embarrassment of what's happening in their family situation, significant loss of trust in their parent. And if you think about it from what I said before, a lot of, children rely on their parents to get their needs met as much as the partner relies on their partner to get their needs met. So if they're seeing this be an issue, it may significantly harm the relationship between parent and child in terms of the child being able to trust their parent. A lot of kids end up feeling really confused or ambivalent towards the betraying parent. And as we talked about before, they may act out quite a bit. But it's definitely a double bind for these kids to be put in a situation to keep a secret from a parent, knowing that the information they have is going to hurt their other parent. And, I think it's important to know that even though the parent is going to be suffering, the child is also going to suffer in putting them in a situation where they would have to keep a secret from their other parent.
In your work, have you had couples that have overcome infidelity issues, or is it kind of like it happens and people split ways? Like, how have you seen people overcome it or not overcome it?
Well, the good news is, yes, infidelity can be overcome. And I think a lot of times we think, well, if you step out on me and have a relationship with someone else, I'm done. But when push comes to shove, when they're faced with this, I've been really amazed at the internal dilemma and the internal conflict that a person has in response to discovery of an affair. So on one hand, they still love their partner. They still want to be with them. They've even, in many cases, created a family together and have a major history together. And so that doesn't just all of a sudden get erased because their partner has had an affair. So that's one side of the equation. But then, of course, there's on the other side, there's this overwhelming feeling of betrayal. And it becomes literally a trauma in their relationship that in many sense of the word, it may feel in that moment of discovery like a life and death situation, because it represents so much of their life and how much they depend on that other person, and that they've given so much trust in this person that all of a sudden in an instant becomes at risk. And so I think really being able to provide people with a sense of hope to know that, yes, they can recover from infidelity, but it is going to take a lot of work. And so one of the things that I do as a therapist is to help couples know how they became at risk for the affair, what they can do to repair in that sense, and that it is possible for them to overcome this. There's a resource that I wanted to share that is one of the best resources that I have, and it's a book called Not Just Friends. This is one of the best books out there on affair recovery. And I use it in the relationships that do struggle with some form of infidelity or betrayal trauma, to help them know that, first of all, they're not alone, that this is something that they can recover from. I think the most important thing is that, some people don't want to go to therapy. But as a therapist, I highly recommend therapy for a lot of reasons. So first of all, find an experienced therapist who specializes and has been trained in affair recovery really is very critical, because once an affair has become discovered, it really forces a couple to take a serious review of their relationship and to make a decision on if and how they're going to stay together. So a lot of times it's allowing, first and foremost, a couple to grieve the loss of trust and to work through the emotions that come up, which include, of course, anger. There's a lot of anxiety and fear. There could even be some denial that might occur, like this can't be happening. But eventually the reality hits them and they need support through that. And the person they would normally turn to, which would be their partner, is the very one that caused the problem in the first place. So having a neutralized party there to help answer questions or to validate emotions or to actually teach in session, to teach a couple how to approach hard conversations, or to give them an opportunity through guidance and direction to make repair on certain things as they go through the process of therapy, is an incredible option for couples if they're willing to take it. It is a very vulnerable process for them, and it can be really, really hard work. But having someone who's experienced and knows what to do in that situation to provide them with the hope and healing that they both need, because both of them need healing. It's not just the one who is the one who discovers, it's the other one as well. We want to be able to make sure that they're with the right person, because if they choose the wrong therapist, one who might be more judgmental or moralistic or inexperienced, that could actually impede or cause more damage in the recovery process. So finding the right kind of therapist is an essential ingredient to affair recovery.
Another question that made me think of, there's a popular saying, once a cheater, always a cheater. But how do you feel about that saying? Do you believe it?
Yeah.
Disbelieve it?
I think that there is some truth to that, but the way I approach people who have gone through such a horrendous crisis in their relationship, I want them to know that they have the potential to change. And I think being able to give them the tools and the resources that they need to do that helps them to have confidence that they can. Because if you think back on what we were talking about earlier with regards to a child who's been exposed to infidelity, they remember that from a childlike perspective, and they remember the pain and suffering that was. So a lot of times individuals who may have an affair with that kind of history actually have so much self-hate for what they've done, because they know what it felt like to be on the other side of that. And so it becomes a really critical internal dilemma that a therapist can help with in creating what I call corrective experiences, to recognize that even though that is part of their history, even though that they've made this huge mistake, that they can be forgiven, and that even if the marriage doesn't end up working out, that they can forgive themselves eventually, and hopefully not repeat that pattern if they understand their why. Why did I do this? What was going on? How can I prevent this from happening again? And so I always try very hard to instill hope and healing for a future relationship, if it's not with the one that they are married to. But I do believe that people can change. But I will be honest that there are some people that are repeat offenders of cheating, and helping them better understand. And I've actually worked with, I'm thinking of one individual in particular who had years and years of having this as a almost an addiction to having these kind of relationships. And he is doing amazingly well, and he is still married to this day. So I think just by knowing what to do in those types of situations and giving them the information that they need to have greater self-awareness, to have greater compassion and empathy for themselves, and their partner and their experience, can make a significant difference in the ability to overcome that history of cheating.
I had one more question I thought of. I'm sorry, this will be the last question.
Oh, it's okay, great.
Someone who, a lot of people do not want this to happen to them, right? They don't want to be on the other end of someone going out on them. So is there anything people can do to prevent that from happening in the first place?
I think that's an excellent question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest things is making sure that if they start to feel like they're disconnecting, that they make every attempt to say, hey, I'm noticing that we're not as connected as we were. Are you noticing that too? Because I really miss you, and I really want to make sure that we stay close. So the first thing is awareness, just being aware that there is a possibility that something is preventing a couple from being connected, because connection really is kind of the foundation. If they aren't feeling connected and their needs aren't getting met, they're going to seek it somewhere else because it's a primal need. I think another thing is knowing your risk factors. What are the risk factors that I could have an affair? And it's what we've been talking about this whole time, is if it's happened in your family history, even if it wasn't even your parents, if it was somebody that you are close to or you've had experience with, it's a process called intergenerational transmission. If there is a family history of infidelity, you are at risk. So you kind of need to know what your risk factors are. Things like mental health issues, depression, anxiety, stress, low self-esteem. There are a lot of other risk factors that put a person in a position that seeks some sort of validation, and sometimes it's from somewhere externally. So again, it's being aware of what those risk factors are, and then knowing what you can do to do some prevention, or at a minimum early intervention, like saying, hey, I'm noticing we're kind of disconnecting here. Is there something going on? And getting help really early in that process, rather than waiting until they're in a crisis mode. Because a lot of times when they end up in my office and they've had the discovery of the affair, they're already in crisis. And so it's really difficult to do recovery from that vantage point versus when it first starts to become a noticed thing. Okay, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, so just like keep good communication, try to see if there's any differences. Don't overanalyze them, but like if you notice.
Yeah. And if you and your partner have a good relationship, then the partner is going to respond to that need or that request and saying, you're right, we have been disconnected and I don't want that either. So let's make sure we make a better effort and put some plans in place that will help keep us from disconnecting. And I think really what it boils down to is just being intentional, making sure that you put your partner as a priority in your life, and to schedule regular dates and to do fun things, and to know that there are different phases of life that put you at greater risk for having an affair. Usually it's when the first baby arrives, because the mother shifts her attention to the child instead of the husband. So that's a risk factor. When you're in the middle of raising kids, around 7 years, when you're really in the heart of creating a career, there's this you've heard the 7-year itch. Sometimes that ends up being true for some people, where they start to feel really disconnected. The honeymoon is over and they're just living life, and it's hard and challenging and stressful. And so just knowing when you are at greater risk, just in terms of life and life phases, could also be something to be greater aware of. So I think that if we could prevent it, we would, obviously, but it just takes time and effort and being intentional in making sure that you put your relationship as a priority and that you both are working hard. One person cannot sustain a marriage. It takes two people to do that. And so making sure that you spend the time and the effort and the energy it is a great way to protect your marriage from having any sort of infidelity or affair.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you want to share the book one more time that you brought up earlier?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a book called Not Just Friends, and it's written by Shelley P. Glass, PhD. You can tell I use it quite frequently. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource for anyone who has experienced betrayal of trust or affair. And it's a really wonderful resource that kind of walks you through a lot of really great information. And what I love about it is it really does focus on trying to sustain and maintain the relationship. It's not a pro-divorce, it's a pro-marriage book. And it does provide a lot of hope and a lot of healing for a lot of people to understand, how does an affair happen and what do I do about it? So it's just a really great resource for anyone who's ever experienced infidelity.
Thank you so much for your time today, Emily. I know I learned a lot. I really enjoyed our conversation and
Me
getting
too.
to know more information of different questions I had. Do you have any final thoughts you want to say or anything?
I think the biggest thing is knowing that if you've experienced any sort of betrayal in your relationship, there is help, and that you can find healing and be able to achieve a better relationship if you work hard enough at it. And I think that's probably the best thing that we can end on, is knowing that for many people who are in recovery from infidelity, that if they can get through and get to the other side of it, their relationship is actually much, much better than it ever was, because they know what put them at risk, and they do everything they can to help them be protected from that in the future. So it is something that can be a great thing for a relationship if you do the work and you commit to your relationship again. You can find greater satisfaction in your marriage. You're welcome.